Hello and welcome everybody to this month's LinkedIn Live with Bailey and French, Humanising the World of Work. Today we're going to be talking about propelling humanity forward and the key to collective imagination. So thank you so much for joining us. I know we've got well over 400 people registered already for this event and lots more watching on the replays. So please do say hello in the chat. Let us know where you are watching us and listening to us from. We would love to hear from you. And also, please feel free to ask any comments, ask any questions or leave any comments. We're also streaming live on YouTube as well as Facebook. So for everyone watching us on different platforms, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. I am over the moon to say I have a fantastic guest here, Chris Yates, who I worked with quite a long time ago. I won't say how many years, at the wonderful American Express. And since then, Chris has been in fantastic leadership roles, leading people functions across some of the largest global organizations in the world, including Microsoft, Caterpillar, Ford, HSBC, and currently at Equinix as the SVP and head of talent, as well as authoring 2 books and already writing another one. So Rewire and Share. Chris, I'm so pleased to have you here today. Thank you for joining.
Delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
On the lovely orange sofas here in Brighton. But I know we've got a really international audience. So please do let us know where you're dialing in from. I know we've got time at the moment to capture both sides of where we are based here in London in the UK, across the Atlantic, as well as out into Asia Pac, Middle East, Europe and Africa. So thank you for joining us. We are talking about a really interesting topic today, which is part of our human series here at Bailey and French. We've been talking about what it means to be human and really looking at our human differentiators, particularly with the rise of AI and tech development having such a big influence on organizational strategies, and really helping people grapple with what we need to do individually in our own roles, what we need to do to support our teams, and how we can work in organizations to really support our planet. And we are going to be tackling some of those big topics here today and in some of our upcoming events here too. And so we're going to dive straight into the topic here today that I wanted to explore specifically with Chris because of his experience and his wonderful insights around social imagination. And this came from exploring what it means to be human and considering some of the research, some of the books that are out there about our differentiators from AI, and really looking at what is it that makes us different, so that people can go and be human on purpose. They know what it is that they do as humans and that it matters, that nothing's going to overtake that. And there's an awful lot that AI can replicate, isn't there? So AI can do an empathy, compassion, energy in its response to me, and all kinds of bots and things that I've played around with on my computer. Mm-hmm. But there was a key thing here that led to social imagination, which was some reading I did around Seligman's book on Homo Prospectus, where he talked about the 4 different aspects of the mind and how that separated us from tech. And one of them was the implicit mind. So just riding a bike, we're thinking, but we're not really conscious of it. Explicit mind is, I must remember to post a letter to my mum for her birthday next week. So being really, really openly conscious. The third aspect is mind wandering and daydreaming. So we still don't know how the mind does that, but the mind has an ability to follow trains of thought that lead to other trains of thought and become something else. And then the 4th key part, which is what I want to talk to you about today, was social imagination, was the fact that when we are in groups, and we can talk about what groups means as well in community, but when we are in groups with other human beings, we naturally have ideas that build on each other's and actually create what we call intuitive leaps. And that is very much the fabric of innovation and creativity in our lives as humans and in organizations. But AI can't do it, and it probably never will. And so if that is really core key difference, and organizations are searching for creativity and innovation in organizations, how do we focus in on social imagination? What's important about groups? What does that mean for DEI and inclusivity? How do we make sure that we can share? I'm going to put my notes down. This is just so, my brain, as I said, was just completely buzzing talking to you about this. So that's my kind of preamble. This is where we're at. Social imagination. This is so important. Chris, tell me your initial kind of ideas around social imagination when I'm saying all those words.
So listening to you, the thing that sparked was, and especially in the last category, I think it was around systems of belief, belief systems.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I've been thinking a lot about recently, I'm a big fan of the book Sapiens.
Yes, me too, yes.
Yeah, and one of the things he talks about in Sapiens is the idea that for us to be human,
mm-hmm.
as it were, it was the idea, which is not a new idea, it's the collective consciousness, but that we had shared belief systems.
Yes.
And the fact that we were able to compete against other humanoid species was a shared belief system enables us to scale. So all other animals organizing by blood ties, so family ties.
Mm-hmm.
You can't only get so far with blood ties. So if you think about other animals in the world, you organize by literal family groups.
Mm-hmm.
But the ability of what makes us human is to go beyond the blood family to connect with others because of a shared idea, because of a shared belief system.
Mm-hmm.
A belief system in so the Alchemists would say there is no progress possible, there is no innovation without belief, which is really interesting because you kind of often science and religion are put against opposite things, but there's a way that without a belief system you would have no innovation, if that makes sense in a very macro way.
Yes. Okay. So belief and innovation. I'm just exploring this now. So in terms of that social imagination and getting groups of people together physically or virtually to combine their kind of ideas and beliefs to be able to build on each other and create for themselves, for their organization, for whatever they need to create for, do they need to be able to, if you've got a really diverse group, do they need to be able to share their beliefs explicitly in that group to be able to create, or can they innovate without sharing beliefs, but just knowing that there's diverse beliefs in the group?
I think we can guide people towards. I don't think it's either something that naturally occurs. And you're right. There's so many places that we could go with this conversation in terms of So two things pop into my mind. One, that you have leaders who emerge in the moment who say, I have a belief, I have a vision, I have a purpose. It becomes sticky. Others share that belief system, and we then have followership created, and then the diversity of the followership or the lack of diversity of the followership coming through. I think the other one is the intentional use, and particularly perhaps the people watching in as kind of HR professionals or something like that. The role of communications, the role of media, the role of what I use this word sometimes provocatively, propaganda, intentionally, to shape a dialogue, to shape an idea, to shape shared missions, visions, strategy, purpose, so that we feel a sense of belonging in what we do. And you're kind of replicating, I always go back to the early humanoids. If I have a shared belief in completing a task, I can scale, and from that I get extra work, more
power, status,
exactly,
opportunity.
Yes, and then people also have meaning in their work because you're doing something which is part of a shared thing, which is absolutely what it means to be human, being part of something. We are social creatures.
So I'm going to step back into your first point around leaders there, because I think that's a really important point right now in organizations. I'm hearing a lot of people stepping away from leadership roles, a lot of new generations avoiding leadership because of the nervousness around the pressure, the responsibility, the visible burnout of leaders in organizations across the world. And yet I feel like we need to still tap into that, those people who have that calling to do and to operate with and through others, and to nurture and grow that leadership calling that you mentioned there, in terms of those people stepping forward with that idea, that ideal, that belief that others can follow. And yet, I guess I'm challenging that a little bit in thinking about social imagination, because I worry that up till now, social imagination has been quashed by a combination of leaders dominating and not allowing everyone to have a voice, but also a lack of diversity and voice and inclusion opportunities for people to feel psychologically safe to say, hang on a second, I've got an idea. It sounds a bit crazy, but I think it might work. Or actually, I read a book about this and they said the opposite thing, and challenge. And we're seeing not just new generations avoiding the opportunity for leadership pathways, but also avoiding conflict in such a significant way that social imagination is diminishing. Is it?
Wow.
Is it, or am I imagining that?
Yeah. When you think about diminishing, there's kind of a sense of loss, I guess. Yeah. And I think another way to reframe that for me is we're at this really pivotal point in human history.
100%. I am
right?
so there. Yeah.
And so rather than thinking about it loss, it's like what's emerging, what's coming through. And I think one of the things I see. I'll confess to being a TikTok fan, right? So don't have a presence, but a huge user of that as a social learning platform. There is a degree of care, just pure care about the planet, care about each other, empathy that I see from newer leaders, younger generations, the youth, as you were, of the world. And I think that's because we've got social access to see what's really going on in a way that no other generation has ever had.
Global megatrends, right?
Global
so
megatrends.
Overnight, and I love that.
So I learn more about what's happening across the world.
Yes.
I have empathy for it, and you see these movements rise and fall, and so we're into a space where leadership doesn't look like it used to. I mean, so many of our organizational models were based, I think, on the Navy. Top down. Strong, tall person.
I'm from a naval family, so yes, it means a lot to me.
And that just isn't true. It's kind of it's now these emergent trends, movements. I actually think you're seeing more leadership in a way. If you think about the amount of social influences, etc., that's leadership, and it's rising and falling, and it's very provocative. My teenage children are following leaders all over the world.
And are they
with massive power?
Yes. And are they better at distinguishing what's true and false? Because I've noticed my teenagers who are 13 and 14 are so much better than me and my parents at working out what's verified and what isn't. They can see, it's almost like they have a sense to it. They don't even need to check it. And so when they give me sensationalist headlines and I go, yeah, but is that true? They've already checked it. And I really love that. They have a more immediate sense of whether they're being conned or not. And I guess that's from having such access.
I'd never thought about that, but you're absolutely right. There's something, and what you sparked was something back to values.
Right.
My own children, they're able to sort of smell the values or ethics behind the why in some of these presenters much sharper than I think I would have been used to. But I think they're being trained to be detectives of media in a way we never were.
And avoid the conflict way before anything happens.
Yeah, it's a totally different dynamic. It's a different leadership model. So, and it's interesting, I think we put labels on, they avoid leadership, they do things. I think
they avoid traditional leadership then.
They're doing something different. They're doing something different. They're riding waves of movements, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that.
Yeah, and the quick rise and fall of that. That worries me a bit, I guess, in terms of that piece.
Did you ever read The Starfish and the Spider?
Oh God, no! Tell me.
It's not old, but it's an old book. But what the idea there is that the spider has central command.
Yes.
And if you pull its legs off, it can't die. With a starfish, if you cut the starfish in half, you get 2 starfish. If you cut it in 5, you get 5 starfish. So the whole thing is really around emergent leadership. And one of my favorite stories. Yeah. So anyone who's watching knows me, I talk about this all the time. In that was they talked about the Apache Nation in North America. And that when the Mexican or US government were trying to kind of wipe out the Apaches, they'd reinvent themselves. They'd kill the leadership and another leader would pop up. So it was really, the idea of being an Apache was a movement where anyone from any status could pop up and be a leader in the moment as needs. And I wonder if that's what we're going to see both in our organizations and society, something like that, where we are not able to control in the same way, but we have to set values. There's something I read that, going back to your point about the children, that us as perhaps Gen Xers, getting a new generation about it, we actually prepared a new generation to have stronger values because we looked at the others. And so we've raised a more, I hate to use the word woke, generation that's quite feely, that's quite values driven, that's going to run the world differently than we did.
Yes. So I was thinking of lots of different things, but now I'm thinking of that. So how do you think, so let me ask you a bit more about you then in terms of what that means for leaders now and how your worldview has been shaped. I loved there was something you put in your book, in your description about being an Atlantic child, because I really resonate with that because I spent time at high school and living in America as well as here and in Europe, and I actually automatically went, yes, that's me as well. So I felt like, yes, I've got a significant bond with that. But there's something about being the way your experience has shaped the way you're now seeing those global trends, those mega trends, whether it be on TikTok, whether it be within organizations. And how do you bring that forward into your work now when people are asking you about belief systems, and how do you get leaders behind a good idea in this changing generational dynamic where you have got people who are looking for more traditional kind of followership and more direction, and then others actually dismissing that and wanting this more fluid leadership model going forwards? How do you shape the view of what you think is needed now? Because we can look to the future and hope that there's going to be different, but we're in the middle, aren't we?
Yeah, it's an interesting blend. So for me, from a professional perspective, it's a myriad of things. You're telling stories from the past. You're quoting books to inspire. You're giving articles to read. You're dropping in some neuroscience. You're dropping in some, I don't know, cognitive behavioral therapy, whatever it is. So it's a myriad of things, which is really about either sparking the imagination for the moment or responding with data, depending on what it is. But I find there isn't a silver bullet. There isn't a method. I think it's very much about being adaptive to the situation and bringing whatever tools or experiences. So to your point, because I've had a plethora of experiences, you're able to be more dynamic in the moment about, so what evidence am I going to bring to create whatever's next?
Right. Yeah, and being more open and accepting to those opportunities. And I like that. I was able to join a session with Dr. Margaret Wheatley back in September, and I've just included it in everything that I've been doing since then, because she's a remarkable woman. Her research around compassion and leadership more recently has led her to focusing on a word that's just resonates so well right now, which is around having sanity. So giving leaders the sanity by creating what she was suggesting as islands of sanity for them. So rather than trying to take them through models and theories, giving them more leadership skills and trying to get new generations through more traditional leadership programs and things, is how can we help support leaders in islands of sanity where they feel that they've got that common belief system, they can check back in their ideas and their assumptions, and is this crazy? Is this a challenge I'm facing alone, or is everyone facing it? And that notion, really resonates with me and a lot of people I've spoken to. But I'm wondering how that works with different leaders in different generations. Do new generational leaders require the same level of sanity checking that perhaps leaders now or Gen Xers kind of feel that need to, almost like everything's changing, I need to get with my group and know that it's all okay?
What resonated for me was this island of space. And my reflection back from your question was, I spent a couple of weeks at West Point in the US military, which is one of the oldest leadership development places. And one of the things they teach right off is this idea of character before competence. It's like the core ideas. If any of you are watching or listening have been in the military past, this idea of character before competence. When you break it down, it's really about values-based leadership. And it's saying that island of space is created by the certainty in who you are. So the US military, of all places, they start by saying, we've got to be very clear about who you are and what you're doing here before you can go out to lead others, because that creates your own space, your own conflict. Because I think getting into conflict as a leader, getting into mess as a leader, I think gets into a space where I'm avoiding giving you feedback because I don't want to have the difficult conversation. I don't want to put myself in a space, as opposed to seeing it, I'm very grounded about who I am. I've got no fear about giving you feedback. Therefore, I'm going to give you feedback almost out of love for you, as opposed to worrying about me as a gift. It's a true gift. So you get down to all of these micro leadership behaviors that are blocked because I don't have the certainty about who I am, which gets into the whole sort of self-knowledge is truth. But that gets into
intelligence.
Which goes right back to what are your values and what's your character, and if that's solid, that gives you the ability to do anything.
And I talk a lot about that human leadership kind of fundamental around emotional intelligence, that step into human intelligence, the foundation being that self-awareness, but building on that to be really authentic and genuine, because that's what builds trust, is when people know who you are, so that they know when they come to you, they know what type of character response they're going to get. There's a certainty around, oh, I know I'll go to Alex because she will help me with this, or her tendency is to take this approach, and I know that that's what I'm going to get. And people trust when they have consistency in character.
Oh, I wonder if that's going back to your earlier point about why do our youth, as it were, be so much more discerning. It's because you've got someone in a public life, and it's possible to research their everything. In a way, I'm thinking with my method, but it's very much a much more ethical leadership, because if I'm doing something disgusting on the side, truth comes out in a very visible way. And that's where we see so many media characters, etc., crash and burn these days, because truth always comes out in some way. It's a much more public, transparent society than we've ever had before, which gives you almost a purity of values, being perhaps the leaders who emerge. So maybe we're on the cusp of a whole new wave of very values-driven leaders than we have been before, because there's nowhere to hide.
And I see a lot of existing leaders scared of that, because of the opportunity of the downfall being so sudden, the mistakes being unforgiven, and the almost the opportunity that's been offered to them in being in that leadership position. The integrity maybe not accepted or understood until they're in that position, to then be nervous to talk in an all-hands meeting to 300 people, 500 people, because someone's going to take it the wrong way.
I'll be found out.
Something's going to happen. And how am I role modeling the values that I want to see and the values that I'm expecting everyone in the organization to see? And what conflict will that create for me privately or publicly? In a situation where, yes, generations, I say generations seem to be more conflict avoidant, and I am seeing that. There's this whole piece around Hyde's anxious generation, which I find really fascinating. But actually, we had a question through, didn't we, about whether or not people are people actually avoiding conflict? And yes, we are also seeing, more audible, more visible conflict bubbling up to the very top of organizations again very quickly. Less worry about hierarchical status. I speak to people on the C-suite and boards of organizations telling me they get direct emails from people with their names and their descriptions, asking them quite blatantly, what are you doing? And I think, well, we never would have experienced that in organizations even 15 years ago. That's a huge change.
It comes back to your point about collective imagination. I know for my daughter, who's it's interesting, she's becoming politically active, aware in the world. Her political action is a click, a like, a share. Because she says, if I do this, the algorithm's going to pick it up and it's going to exemplify. So within an hour, something can turn into a movement overnight. And so she's participating in not the traditional, I'm going to stand on the street corner with a placard, but it's a different movement as she moves from thing to thing to thing.
And that's just given me an intuitive leap, because share obviously being the title of your book. So I will share this with everybody here. This fantastic book came out in 22, and I was saying to Chris beforehand, I think there's an element of prediction in there, because actually it feels even more relevant now in 24, around the fact that you've titled it Share. So I'm even interested to know whether or not that was relevant to you actually seeing people sharing things more online in the digital space tool. But my thinking was, how do we get people to a space where they are comfortable to share? You've used the word share and together continuously throughout that book, and that's really what stood out for me. It was very difficult to sum up and skim. I actually, every time I went into it, I was like, no, I've got to really read. Need some space, go away. I need to really think about what's being said here, because there was some profound stuff in there that really kind of hit me, and I was thinking, gosh, yes, like, coming back up to it, to share absolutely should be the title. So it made sense to me after reading more and more. Share made more and more sense as a title. But the environment and the world that we're living in at the moment, sharing means something digitally, doesn't it? Is it the same that we're trying to create with that book in terms of the share, the togetherness of belief systems? Do you think that's the same digitally as it is in person?
Oh gosh, I think it's such a big question.
Sorry, that is a big question. That was brewing for a while, wasn't it? Sorry, you don't know anything around that. It strikes me that share it means different things to different people, doesn't it?
Yeah, it meant so much. When I first started the book, I was fascinated by Airbnb.
Okay.
just with the idea that here's my home, and I'm going to profit by sharing my space with people. Then I got into Uber as there's a whole business model, but here's my car, and I'm going to do it. And then I was living in the US, I think, at the time, and I think there was heavy snow, and I watched every single person on our block come out with their own snowblower, and I was like, we only needed one, but we have 50 in the street.
Yeah.
And what if we were able to share as a community? But what blocked us was, I don't know any of my neighbors, therefore we're going to buy 49 more snowblowers than we need because we don't know each other.
Okay.
Right, and that was like, oh wow, the absence of community and then isolation. Where did that go? Then I got very macro, to your point, of thinking about one planet,
yes,
zero sum game, and that we cannot have continuous competition forever and ever and ever because one planet. And increasingly, I think, when I was writing that, sorry, I was working at Microsoft, and the idea of open code and sharing code, that code is not something that we hide, that code is something we make ubiquitous for the generation of ideas for mankind, and on and on and on. So ideas just kept coming about, you're right, about multiple levels of sharing and cooperation being one of the core things that defines humanity. I talk about this, I've traveled to like over 100 countries or something now, and I could go on and tell stories, but one of the things for me that defines humans across race, religion, everywhere else, is that I've been stuck in bad places or weird places all over the planet, and people have come and helped me. And it's been consistently human. People are good. And so there's something in what it means to be human, to share and look after each other.
It's that interdependence, isn't it? And interconnectedness.
At the core.
That is absolutely at
and
the
it's
core.
That scale beyond family.
Yes.
I don't just look after my family. I look after all of us because there's a shared something that makes us human.
And that really resonates, because just reminding ourselves continuously. We actually finished our last live on that topic with a poem about how people are good, because it was absolutely that difference in terms of, you can see so much, you can see hate, you can see difference. And I was talking last week, the week before in Dallas at a conference, about how I've lived similarly in 42 places in 46 years, 47 years. And rather than initially noticing the differences in culture, what's come to me over all those years and working with organizations across the world in different places is actually the common humanity that collects us and binds us is so important and so powerful. And that community, that connection, that togetherness. And what people would prefer is, and I ask my children this over dinner sometimes, what would you prefer? Would you prefer the unreality of your online experience right now to soak yourself into your device and be wherever you want to be with which groups you want to be with? Or do you prefer your reality in your human person and the situation that you're in? And in many circumstances, people prefer that unreality. And that makes me very nervous, that there's an unreality developing where people aren't together, but there's a seemingness of together, but it's flimsy.
But they're both more connected and less connected in a funny sorts of way.
Totally
my eldest child has friends literally all over the world that he's never met. And sometimes they will go into crisis, and their first place of refuge, without sort of naming, is that an online community, an online friend. So a couple of months ago, he was counseling someone that he'd never met halfway around the world, who was going through a really difficult time, almost suicidal. And the first place was to this online community of care, as opposed to, which is really interesting and so different to us.
And we see it with football clubs in England, don't we?
We do.
So you just made me think of my husband, who will, once he's watched a match, regardless of result, go straight onto the community chat to share and to go, what's everyone thinking about that goal and why did that happen that way, and what did the ref really say? And it's that immediate community validates what I'm thinking, what I'm saying. That immediate share that's really important.
So we're a different world than we were, 10 years ago, so much, because of community, because of connection. So going back to that challenge of like, how do we think about leadership being positive now, that we're actually in maybe a more connected, more positive, more caring world that could emerge. That's my hope, is that all of this actually makes us a more empathic world than we have been before because of the media, because of the connections.
Yes, and I like that, and I want to be hopeful and believe in that. I do, and I see that there is a lot of opportunity there. I feel that leaders have got a bigger duty than ever before, a bigger responsibility in whatever capacity they have, and poignant in such an important week for voting going on in different parts of the world, that actually I read recently in one of the HR magazines that people actually trust organizational leaders more than they trust politicians, media experts, people who are out there examining the world and community and societies that we live in. Actually, they have more trust in organizational leaders than before. And it took me to the space of organizational leaders right now are the ones that have the biggest influence on our planet.
Yes.
So I'm like going, right, okay, so how do we work back from this big planet issue that we have? Who's going to be the ones that actually change it? I know politicians and policy making is important in contribution to that because it can accelerate, but it can also exacerbate and slow things down. And actually, organisational leaders have a choice and an opportunity and a duty.
Oh, you've hit on a hobby, a hobby horse. So I won't take credit for this, but someone shared this with me once. If you go to the high street, if you go to a city and you look at what the biggest buildings are in the city. So once upon a time, it used to be the palaces, and now we visit the palaces as, the relics, coming in. And then maybe it was the cathedrals or the temples because the religions were strong, but we visit those as relics, or we get the tourist stuff. So which are the biggest buildings in every city? It's the corporates. And there's something like through thousands of years, the biggest building has always told you who's in charge to a degree, And I know at times I've worked for some big brand organizations, and when looking at how, say, we would deal with a regulator on something, the smartest minds, the biggest investment is in-house, not with the regulator. And I look at something like AI, which is terrifying people. And unless we have core ethics within the organization around what our values are, the speed of the organization to compete far outstrips the ability of government to regulate, which comes back to this need, probably for everyone watching. We are those of us who work in this space, HR, leadership, etc. We are literally have a very valuable societal role in shaping the ethics and values of the people who are running the planet. And I don't think we always think like that. I know I increasingly do, that the policymakers in these marketing teams, in the boardrooms, shape the cleanliness of our water, the quality of our food, the supply chain ethics, etc., far more than a regulator or a government will. So how do we instill leadership and ethics and values in a way that saves the rest of us? And that's probably the job of everyone watching and listening right now.
At pace.
We
have to do it at pace.
But I think it's realizing how important that role of leadership really is. I think you're absolutely right.
It's really fundamental. And it's worryingly fundamental, I think, that a lot of organizations are jumping to reskilling their leaders rather than giving leaders the space to actually think, connect, share, and recognize their role and responsibility and come to what they need to do. So there feels like almost like not enough recognition for what leaders can create together in peers and in social imagination groups. So where's the space that's created? And you'll know this as well, even if we place the highest priority on a mandatory leadership training course in a large organization with the best models and inputs and design blended programs, that some people won't show up because there's more important priorities going on for whatever reason. Are we designing the right things for leaders to come to feel that it's valuable time? Are we just taking precious time away from people that they could be doing other things? What are we allowing, or not just allowing, but empowering people to do together when they are together?
I think tactically, in my practice, we've moved away from the traditional ways of thinking about leadership development. So one of my colleagues, she's actually Equinix, she talks about making any intervention delicious.
Oh, I like that.
Delicious.
But that
So
should
something-
be, shouldn't it? As humans, we look for...
I'm not sure delicious was our user criteria all of the time. I think the second thing is that beyond being delicious and making the user experience so important, so that I haven't got to push anybody by mandatory, it's actually, I want to eat it, is thinking about things like media, things like propaganda, things like the very experience of the building being part of your leadership development method. I know some of the work we did, we won't name organizations, but a large well-known bank in my state, the propaganda, the environment, the ambient messaging, everything was part of our leadership development method in terms of creating an environment where ethics are embodied, not just taught in a classroom.
Experience.
So the experience of the organization is almost part of your leadership development agenda. It's not just something, go on a course in 2 weeks. It should be part of the screensaver that turns up, the messaging, all of these things that's subliminal. You're sending messages about what it means to be here in this community.
Culture.
Yes. So it's not something I go away for 2 weeks and do. It's something that's with me every day.
Yeah, and that power and importance of those communication channels and platforms and opportunities and experiences are as important,
right,
as the message, the theory, the content.
And then small habits. Increasingly looking at habits-based change as rather than go away and learn something. So what are tiny micro habits that we practice every day that if everyone starts doing them, we've all changed because we're doing a new thing in a different way.
Yeah, and I found more recently that the influencers have a bigger impact on those habits. So the recommendation from a peer who's in the same situation is so much more powerful than any kind of educational expert that comes in because they've got a theory and some data. It's almost like we've had that data kind of influence for some time, and now people just want to go back to almost like those recommendations of, well, what do you use? Well, what do you eat? Well, why do you use that book? What does the thing? Well, tell me, I want that as well.
Because you trust your community to recommend a gardener more than you do the online.
You do. You do. And so how do we seek out those influencers as leaders in organizations rather than traditional hierarchical leaders to actually influence? And we're touching on tipping point methodology here in terms of creating that mass experience and the critical mass and understanding through different groups. But ensuring, for me, this biggest thing I think at the moment is ensuring the voice is heard, that everyone has the opportunity to have voice in organizations. And I think some organizations are really far ahead in that. But on the maturity curve, I don't think the critical mass is there yet. It feels like the critical mass is still struggling to give everyone voice. Do you see that in large organizations?
Yeah, I've been a proponent, I did this in one of the places that I worked, of moving away from the traditional employee satisfaction surveys, look at scale, fill something in, to using crowdsourcing technology. So really almost starting with what is it you want to talk about? No question. As opposed to management saying, we want to ask you 5 questions about this topic on a 1 to 5 scale. Actually saying, what is it that you want to talk about? And we actually had the CEO come and say, what do you want to talk about? What do you think solutions are? And so the management is responding to the crowd as opposed to the crowd responding to the management agenda. So it changes it on its head in terms of what the dialogue's all about.
We do that. So with our all hands, we start with questions every single time, every month. We start with where's your head at? What do you care about? And then if we're not tapping into what people care about right now, there's a disjoint, isn't there?
But it comes back to that point you made earlier, which was around, as a leader, am I so threatened by what the crowd might ask me that I don't really want any questions because I'm scripted? I had my communications leader write me a script
and tell me what I can and
tell me, or maybe I've planted audience members in the audience to say, make sure I get the questions I want to answer.
But it leaks. You can tell.
But that goes back to your point of the youth looking at the influences they want to follow, saying, this is authentic, this is not authentic. And it comes back to that point of having core values, which means I can take any question. If I don't know the answer, I'll say I don't know the answer. That's a great question. I'm going to learn from the question to be a better leader next time. But that comes back to that character before competence thing and really being grounded.
And is it strong enough a differentiator for than AI for us to feel solid in that as, in the same way I've talked about this before, cognitive behavioral therapy. So the more you become aware of something you're doing, the more you have the opportunity to influence how you behave in that moment. So if we are aware of social imagination techniques and intuitive leaps and what matters in those moments in terms of platforms, voice, experience, can we therefore help accelerate our social imagination opportunities and our intuitive leaps in particular directions, such as the bigger planet issues that we're facing?
I think so. I think it's the whole cognitive dissonance piece, because if I choose to go to the therapist, yes, and they're taking me on a part and saying, well, I'm going to do this, then let's say I'm using flooding. There's a spider somewhere in the room, yeah, and we're going to talk about how you feel about it, to the point of we're going to put spiders all over you. I hope you're not scared of spiders.
No, well, not so much spiders, no.
Spiders, right? But part of that is my acceptance. It's like hypnosis or any of the other things. I'm going to accept that I'm going to be accepting of the method. So I think in organizations, as we try different things, we can be very transparent about here's what we're doing and why, and here is the end. Mm-hmm. And it's an invitation almost to be part of a journey, because people are wise enough to be cynical if they see social manipulation happening. I think increasingly,
and call it out more,
and call it out. Well. And to your point, I think there's then more trust of that than the AI, which is clearly influenced by
a controller, a prompter, yes. A human prompter and controller,
or many who have an agenda.
Yeah, and I talk about that a lot in terms of, there's a great fear arising at the moment in organisations mm-hmm. of people who haven't experienced AI or don't feel confident to use it, in the fact that it's only really a greater computer that goes faster with more data. That's all it is. In the same way that a calculator helped, early days do maths quicker with more pace, with more information. But that still there's the prompters, the people who are putting the input in and controlling the narrative and that conversation. And I think that's going to be more and more important. I just want to hold that, just because I want to just mention to everyone, we have a few more minutes. So if you've got any comments or questions, please do get them in now for Chris or for myself in conversation. And I've got my team sharing Chris's wonderful books, both Share and Rewire. So the QR code is there. Please do use those links to have a look on those books. I highly recommend both of them. Come back to your point, Chris. I just wanted to make sure that people had the chance to download that before we finish. Time goes so quickly when you're having.
Yeah, I was going to come back to your challenge of AI as just a computer. Yes. I think we don't know yet. I think one of the things I read recently, it was there's a group looking at ethical AI.
Yes.
Out there, and the pace of learning was about 5 years ahead of where people thought it was.
Yeah.
And the possibility for links to be made that are faster than we may comprehend eventually, because it's not that learning is going to trail off at some point. This is a continuous learning model that will make inferences and links that have never been possible before. So I think there's a big we don't know in terms of where that gets us.
Which is scary. Which is
scary or amazing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But it still comes back to that core aspect of, with the amount of humans there are on this planet and the experiences we have in our lives in every single second of our days, there's no AI that will ever be able to do the intuitive leaps that humans can do in a group, either together and sharing in a conversation in a team or in an organization or even online across the world. That we've got power in our sharing, we've got power in our imagination together, and that we need to stay strong in that, regardless of how fast the tech develops, even ahead of what we can comprehend.
Yes.
Just big stuff.
Yes, I always go back to ice cream. There's an experience of actually putting ice cream in your mouth as opposed to reading about it. And I think the AI can read about ice cream, but the sensory element of being a human and experiencing ice cream is difficult to replicate.
Can play chess but can't be happy about it. Exactly. So we've got lots of good stuff like that we can fall back on, and that's what gives me hope. And I think it's this hope faith thing of confidence that I think people need right now. If people are looking for those certainties, the things that they can anchor, the trust, the integrity, the values and the systems that help us. Not just in our roles and our teams, but in organisations, in ways that we can change and influence the world for the better for our planet and our wonderful species and all the species that we share it with. So,
let's hope so.
Yes, big stuff. I knew this was going to be a big conversation. I really hope everyone has been enjoying it as much as I have, because I've just completely sucked in, and I can't wait to sit down and actually rewatch this and go through again and think about all the things. And I think we've got a few questions coming through. Let's have a look. So we have one like, thank you for sharing. What are we doing to create deeply meaningful? To create deeply unnatural loneliness in business and in society. Oh, that's a big one. What are we doing to create unnatural loneliness? Because it is
create unnatural.
Yeah. Are we creating unnatural loneliness in society?
I think there's always been loneliness.
Mm.
I think there's always been loneliness in society. I think loneliness is one of the most undiscussed things as an aspect of human life. The whole, Eleanor Rigby Beatles song of which I thought was a beautiful window into so many people living different lives that we never see. How many people we walk around in a crowd and make assumptions that they're living a life that looks like our life, but actually they're deeply lonely and waiting just to not be here. There's so much of our society. My hope, turning the positive spin, is that things like the communities actually give us space for people to participate in society, maybe which they didn't have that invitation before. But I think as in the world, we've always had that. Yeah.
So I just wonder, because I see data that says that we're increasing in loneliness and that's increasing impacts on our mental and physical well-being. But maybe it's the awareness of the loneliness.
Yeah,
that's increasing, the ability to recognize on a global scale something that maybe has not been measured enough in the past.
Did we care enough to measure it?
Did we care enough to measure it? That's a big one.
Yeah.
So
now we know.
Now we know what we're going to do about it.
Exactly, but that's the hope, isn't it?
Yes, 100%. That's the hope, and people are good. So as long as people are good, we're all going to be focusing on the right things. And I am, clearly a positivist in terms of.
You always have been.
I have to be, because I think there needs to be some level of hope, but I do believe in it, that people are good, and I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I
didn't know where we would go in the conversation, so it's been fascinating. Thank you.
I told you unscripted, so and I think that's what most people expect. They want to know the real conversation, not the one that's kind of pre-planned and okayed and measured. So I thank you very much for being able to be open-minded and accepting of an unscripted conversation on the orange sofas here, and thank you so much. I'm really pleased to have had this conversation. I look forward to many more, and thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please do send in more questions and comments. We've got a whole series of other events coming up, round tables. We've got a further event coming up in December as part of this Human series on a global live stage, so please do have a look at our Human series on our website page and sign up for any of the events that you'd like to join us with. There's also a whole load of freebies and giveaways, insights, and please get in touch if you think there's something that we can support you with at Bailey & French. We love having these conversations and sharing our insights and developing that market intelligence on a global scale. So if you've got more information, insights, data that you'd love to be part of those conversations with us, then do please reach out as well. And thank you so much to my team who've set this up wonderfully today. Thank you so much, Mike and Alan, and everyone else supporting us. So I'll say goodbye for now. I hope you have a brilliant rest of your day wherever you are, and whatever is happening. So thank you very much.